Well, hello and good day to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today on our DNA Company webinar. Today, we are going to be talking about detoxification and the mind connection. Uh, Something that I'm sure plays in a lot of people's minds, pun intended. We're going to be talking about and exploring how toxins and the detoxification pathways influence your genetic makeup and how it directly can impact mental health. We're going to be talking about the role of certain detoxification genes and those pathways and how that can affect uh, symptoms like anxiety, depression, cognitive decline. And definitely, we are going to be getting into talking about practical strategies. How can you optimize your detox pathways and improve brain function and overall well being? And I have the absolute delight and pleasure to welcome back one of our favorites to our webinars, Justin Harris, and also one of our newer add-ins, brilliant part of our clinician team, as well as actually being a part of the DNA company way back when, Dr. Adilia Sapp. Thank you so much for being here. You want to say hi to everyone here today and tonight, depending on where you are in the world?
Hello, hello. Thank you everybody for coming. I'm excited to be here. And toxins, man, that topic comes up constantly. I think that all of us are dealing with some level of toxic load nowadays, right? Where our ancestors maybe didn't have nearly the burden as our bodies have now. And I think that that burden has really influenced a lot of the way that our cells actually act and behave, and certainly the way that our brains function. So hopefully we can get to the bottom of some of these issues tonight. Welcome, Dr. Adilia, as well. I'm so glad to see you here.
So happy to be here. Honored to be invited. Love these webinars. Loved working with both of you on prior ones. It's a nice break from clinical practice. I get to talk about some of my findings and what I'm seeing, and then relate them to genetics. And I love talking about mental health specifically. That's my clinical focus. But my background was in genetics when I graduated, like Dr. Varden indicated, when the DNA company was a tiny little startup in Mississauga in Ontario, Canada. So happy to be back, and thanks so much for inviting me on one of my favorite topics.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And I think that this will be a very fruitful webinar and definitely helpful to all of you, our audience, who are participating live, but then also for all of you who will be listening on the replay. We do encourage you to fill out that poll. We like to see what your needs, what you have been through, what you are looking to get out of this webinar. So please take a moment and fill that out. We're very, very appreciative. We would also love to see in the chat, where are you hailing from? Where are you right now? Logging in and being with us here today for this webinar. Always love to see the vast reach around the globe for those of you joining. So I wanted to comment on a couple of statistics that have been happening when it comes to mental health. And if either of you have some that you want to chime in on, that would be wonderful, because I think it's so important that we realize the prevalence of mental illness. For example, the fact that approximately 23% of US adults experience a mental health condition. And that was done in 2002, as referenced by Forbes. The fact that young adults, so we're talking ages 18 to 25, this age group has the highest rate of mental health concerns, with over 33% experiencing any mental illness and over 11% experiencing serious mental illness. And, you know, we can throw out some of these stats, but what really is the root cause? What is causing this? And how can they truly be helped? Because a lot of times we go to the doctors, and what do? You get a prescription for an anti-anxiety or some other medication, but that's not really focusing on the root cause of what's going on. And one of the things that we're going to also be talking about is a couple of case studies and anecdotal situations of how toxicity has affected mental health. And I'm not saying that toxins are the root cause of all mental illness, okay? But it certainly is the cause of some, and maybe many. We just don't know. And that's why it's always good to look deeper. Do either of you have any other stats that are prominent to you regarding mental illness or toxins and mental illness?
Yeah, there was actually another statistic showing almost 50% of youth in the US between 13 and 18 are experiencing what could be considered a mental health condition. So that was a recent statistic, and I don't have the exact source, but it does line up with what I'm seeing in clinical practice and in primary care. You know, my focus was not in pediatrics, but now I'm moving my age range down to include the pediatric population because there's so many that need help in the realm of mental health.
Yeah, I think it's also a little bit difficult to diagnose acute versus chronic when it comes to these conditions, right? Because it's like, how many people actually have an imbalance in their chemistry equation, and how many of them are just sort of coming off of a bad breakup, and maybe for 6 months, 9 months, they're experiencing this bout of it. I think it gets a little bit difficult to really know exactly what's what, but symptomology really is the downstream effect of the problem, right? Like the symptoms aren't the problem. The symptoms are the result of the problem. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
toxins,
Okay,
I
wait,
think
but
micronutrients deficiencies, gut health problems, how many of us are sedentary, how many of us are sitting too much and in front of screens, etc. I think there's a lot
Mhm.
that can be done to improve mental health, and toxins are certainly a big part of that conversation modern day.
Well,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Sorry, go on, Dr. Varden.
no, that's okay. It really just goes to show you that it seems like such an overwhelming problem, but there are so many things that we can do to help support and to help dare I say heal, you know, and I say that carefully, you know, when it comes to symptoms and health and mental health, because there's so many aspects to it. There's so many facets involved. But when we really get down to knowing someone's genes, we have a better clarity in understanding where are they weak, where are they strong, what can we leverage, and what do we need to support? And then how can we support them best? And that's really where the precision medicine comes in and where our DNA 360 comes in. Um, by the way, I don't want to leave our audience hanging. I want to recognize that they did put in several of them where they're coming from. I see, you know, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, New York. We've got a few people from New York, a few people from Pennsylvania, Melbourne, Australia, probably the furthest one from where I happen to be sitting right now. Got more on the East Coast of Delaware and Montreal. Some,
Montreal,
yeah, some on the West
where I'm
Coast.
from.
Yeah, we've got Tacoma, Washington, British Columbia,
Located there.
Hampshire area. Just
Justin.
Right
oh,
out
this
to you.
is wonderful. Got
We're
some.
covering all of North America and Australia. We have someone from Australia. Okay,
Beautiful.
Adelaide, Australia. Nice, very nice.
Thank you so much, everyone. So wonderful that you are here, and you know, bringing in your your ears and your willingness to absorb this information, and hopefully turning around, not just keeping this information to yourself, but to then turn around and share it with others. Because that's really what's most important, is that we disseminate the knowledge,
Mhm.
the empowerment. So let's dive in to understanding some of the detoxification pathways, how this works into mental health. And I do want to jump in, first of all, to kind of give an overview of the role of toxins in mental health, because really, toxins, both external, so we're talking pollutants, heavy metals, pesticides, but as well as internal, so we're talking about metabolic byproducts, can harm mental health. How can that be done? Well, first of all, crossing the blood-brain barrier. That gut-brain axis is very, very important. But anytime that we are taking in these toxins, that if they are small enough, if they are able to cross that blood-brain barrier, our brain is exposed. So toxins like mercury and lead, they can penetrate the brain, causing neuroinflammation, oxidative stress. That is going to impair your ability for executive function in the frontal lobe or temporal lobes, or different aspects, different ways of processing information. It can also trigger neurotransmitter dysregulation. So we're talking about toxins that can actually interfere with serotonin, dopamine, GABA pathways. These can lead to anxiety, depression, cognitive decline. And then, when I had mentioned about neuroinflammation, when that becomes chronic, when you have chronic exposure of toxins, that can activate what we call the microglia, one of the types of cells in the brain. And that contributes to conditions that can lead to things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. These are really important to realize the impact that toxins can have on our bodies. So we really have to look at the detoxification pathways. And we cover a lot of those in our reports. We cover the methylation pathway, we cover glutathione conjugation pathway, antioxidation, even glucuronidation pathways. These are all phase 1 and phase 2, mainly phase 2 pathways that are very important. And this is what we're going to be diving into. So first, let's start with you, Justin. I want, if you would please, to maybe talk about some connections of toxins, toxin accumulation, the detox pathways. What do you see, and how do you recognize this in the clients that you see?
It's so funny, Dr. Varden, that, like you said, there's these metabolic byproducts that our body literally makes. So, like, we take in toxins, but our body also makes them. So, on the genetic pathways that you referenced there, the antioxidative pathway, which would be mitochondrial and free radical related. And then you also mentioned glucuronidation. So, these are these toxic hormone byproducts as well. So, your body makes hormones, there's byproducts. Your body makes ATP energy, there's byproducts. That has to be added into the cumulative toxin load of what we're breathing in, right? Pollution in the air, what we're taking in via pollution in the water, the food, the soil, the Wi-Fi, all of these things together add to a totality of a toxin load. And one of the things that's unique about what we do is that we have the capacity to look at those genetic weak points and then tailor our approach and our detox strategies to that, right? So, like, for example, within the glutathione genes, we test for 3 primary glutathione genes, glutathione being phase 2 detoxification, right? So it's how our body takes toxins, changes them around, renders them water soluble so that you can get rid of it, going to the bathroom, sweating, etc. Even within what we look at, there's 3 genes that are all associated with different locations in the body, right? So toxins can accumulate in all these different places. We have GSTT1, that's for the liver. We have GST-M1, which is for the gut. The gut's your second brain. The body actually has three brains, believe it or not. Your head, your gut, and then your heart. All three of those are actually brains, and toxins can impact all of them. Then we have GST-P1, which is for the respiratory tract, so pollution and different things that you would breathe in. I always work backwards from the genes, right? So I look at the weak points and I add in interventions to reinforce that suboptimal area. And then we look at the downstream, right? So sometimes I've had patients where I've added in a mitochondrial detox support, and then later on they had less CRP in their blood work, right? So it's like the toxin load and the inflammation load is oftentimes stemming from some sort of genetic weak point. And of course, being the DNA co, that's what we always do. Dr. Adilia, do you have, I know that you do a lot with mental illness and you do a lot of, you see a lot of patients. Where's the main things that you're seeing right now as far as problems with detox? Is it gut? Is it brain? Like, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so I am seeing the most in terms of mental health symptoms. I'm seeing anxiety and depression really the most. However, cognitive issues are really up there. With potentially up to 50% of youth, let's say between 13 and 18, having some sort of mental or cognitive condition. That's probably one of the number one symptoms that I'm seeing. In that realm. One of my colleagues actually has a focus more on digestive health. So some people, it affects them more digestively. Some people, it's more cardiovascular. But I would say overall cognitive and that brain fog piece is often a sign that the toxic burden can be higher. And I used to think of it more like in terms of ADHD and Alzheimer's. Maybe there could be some toxic accumulation, toxic burden issues, poor detox. But now I'm seeing anxiety and even depression. That's often the prominent piece. And we're at a point in medicine where we can't just like prescribe Prozac to 50% of people, We're at a kind of a turning point, as Peter Attia talks about in Outlive. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. Anyone listening, that's like an amazing book. He talks about medicine 3.0. We're at the point where we're handling urgent situations better, sickness, bacteria, viruses, etc. But for these chronic complex conditions, which are often related to toxic burden, we're at a point where we have to figure them out and get to the root cause. And I'm seeing a lot of teenagers with depression, anxiety, and ADHD as like the three most common conditions, essentially. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I've been watching the chat, and people are talking about that. Number one, thank you, Dirk, by the way. He is an absolute staple in our webinars. I'm so glad to see you, or at least, see that you are present. But he was saying that we really need to make the topic of mental health routine, an acceptable topic without stigma. Working into promoting a yearly evaluation, just like we do physicals and other things, because unfortunately there has been a lot of stigma with it. Oh, well, you may not get a particular job or be able to do a particular thing or be in a particular position if you were diagnosed with a certain mental health condition or had to, go into an institution for a period of time. It is so sad. So people they're not as readily able and wanting to speak about it. And therefore they don't get the help that they need. And sometimes it is a matter of that chemical imbalance, Justin, like what you were saying. Maybe they just need some B vitamins or, trace minerals or, some good sleep or, something. Of course, it may not be that simple, but who knows? I mean, you have to look at the person sitting in front of you, but it could be that could make all the difference in the world. But if they don't seek help, if they are scared to let others know that they're going through this, how sad, that they have to continue to suffer like that, possibly unnecessarily. I mean, nobody should have to go through that. So I love that idea, and I hope that we as a society, a global society, starts opening up to accepting that and really looking at ways to help. And speaking of help and why people, what they are looking for and, voicing concerns, if we can have our angels in the background there, bring up the poll. I would love to see the answers that people have given. Thank you. So our first question that we asked is, have you ever done genetic testing with the DNA company or another provider to understand your detox pathways for brain health? And overwhelmingly, more than, well, 65% of you said, yes, you've done testing with us, the DNA company. Thank you very much. About 26% said, no, you've never done any. Well, we hope that you do, hopefully through us, but, even still, having that information is extremely useful. And 9% of you said you have, but with another provider. Our second question, which of the following symptoms of poor detoxification or brain health have you experienced? And selecting all that applied. Wow, look at the amounts. There are several of you, and we're talking even numbers: brain fog, difficulty concentrating. I think everyone at some point in time has probably gone through that, me included. Whether it be hormone imbalance, not getting enough sleep, going through the whole COVID pandemic experience, etc. I mean, whatever the case may be, I feel you there for sure. Persistent fatigue or low energy is another huge one, and I see this so much in the clients that I see, and I'm sure you guys probably agree with this as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. The next biggest one being anxiety, feelings of overwhelm. Again, I honestly am right up there with you. Those are our top three. Those others following: sensitivities to environmental toxins, those perfumes, cleaning products. Yeah, that could be a whole other episode in itself. But also mood swings, irritability, even depression, low motivation, and then those frequent migraines, headaches coming in. So yeah, these are definitely symptoms that are prevalent when it comes to difficulty in detoxification, having your toxic load be as high as it is. And that even goes of what I call the allostatic load, which are stresses, all the stresses cumulatively that you have had over your life. It's just putting one more straw on that camel's back. What is going to finally break it? So yeah, definitely, again, feeling for you. Oh, I love, I didn't see this last one. 7% of you said none of the above. Oh, obviously.
Yeah, that's amazing that some people are managing unscathed. Good for you.
I would
I'm guessing
love,
your detox genes are better. I wish that was me.
you know what? Pop some of the things that you are doing in the chat. I'm sure others would love to hear what you have to say. Seeing if it is some of the things that we're going to be mentioning. Fantastic. I love seeing that. Our final question, how familiar are you with the connection between toxins, detoxification, and mental health? And 3/4 of you, overwhelmingly, that you are somewhat familiar. You've heard of it, but you definitely want to learn more. So here you go. And hopefully we will provide you with more of that information. And then, about 18% saying very familiar, that you've researched it extensively. Thank you for being here. Hopefully there are some other pearls of wisdom that you can take away from this webinar tonight. And then 9% of you saying, not familiar, new to this. Fantastic. Again, we hope you take away information that is usable for you immediately and in the long term. Thank you for that. So let's start diving into some of the detox pathways. Let's talk about how they can affect our oxidative stress, how that affects our gut, how that affects our brain. Who would like to jump in? I know we've already somewhat talked about the glutathione conjugation genes. So these are our GST genes that you'll find in the anti-inflammation reports. Actually, all of our detox pathways are covered in that report, even along with our vitamin D. Vitamin D, our hormone D, is also very important to health, detoxification, gut health, brain health. And they are also sprinkled throughout our other reports because they really do affect all of our other symptoms. So who would like to jump in and add a little more wisdom? Dr. Adilia.
I'll jump in. I mean, a great place to start if someone is concerned about their overall toxic burden is their genetics. Like I would back that. I don't always start that like in clinical practice, but let me tell you, when I found out what my detox genes were and my cognitive and executive profile, it changed my life. It basically tells you your blueprint. And then things start clicking, things start making sense. You start making changes that are more tailored to your biology. And then, of course, you can do other testing. If there's specific areas you're concerned about, you can do urinary tests like Total Tox. There's a bunch of them out there on the market. You can get your doctor, depending on where you're located, to run certain blood work. But genes like the glutathione genes, the GSTT1, the GSTM1, the GSTP1, those are super kind of critical for detox. Then there's genes like COMT, right, that are in the executive profile, but they also affect your hormone detox and your detox overall. And COMT is a gene that affects your ability to metabolize neurotransmitters and catecholamines. So basically, it affects the speed at which you break down stress hormones and dopamine and epinephrine. And if you have slow COMT, you're detoxing more slowly. You may have an increased stress response. You may have better focus, but you may have more anxiety. So that's just one example would be COMT. If you have fast COMT, you're going to be breaking things down quicker. You might be better at multitasking. You might be better at transitioning. You may even be more hyperactive, but you also may detox better. So a lot of these genes are not just, good or bad. They're variations with pros and cons. Just in the mental health panel, in terms of like some of the more sort of practical things, if you have slow COMT and you're detoxing really slowly, at least in terms of your neurotransmitters and some other things, you can take yerba mate as an example. I know we talked about that one last time, Justin. If you have fast COMT, you can have green tea, which helps slow it down. And just knowing where you sit in terms of that can be really helpful because there's a lot of like really common supplements, like even quercetin you mentioned last time, that can slow down COMT further. So if you have slow COMT, you wouldn't be wanting to take it. But then other than the genes and the specific tailored things, there's some general things like lowering your overall toxic burden. And a great resource for that is the Environmental Working Group. I don't know if you guys use that one a lot,
Oh, yes.
but they have so many good resources. You can look up like almost any subject. They have like mattress guides. You can download their Healthy Living app and like focus on less kind of toxic products and stuff. And sauna is one of my top recommendations, kind of across the board, infrared sauna. Justin, why don't you continue from there?
It's worth mentioning too that in the interest of quantifying how your toxic burden is actually impacting your health, your longevity, etc., I recommend looking at our de-aging reports because it's a really interesting thing that they do, and it's kind of the other side of the genes, right? So we have the genes themselves handy with the DNA 360, and that's great because that's your blueprint. The de-aging is measuring epigenetic expression of your genes, right? So epi is a Greek word. It means like above. So if we were to look at it as though your genes are a blueprint, remember, this is an instruction manual. It has to be read. So it has to be transcribed by these transcription factors. Your cells are reading your DNA blueprint and they're being instructed on how to behave. So we've got this blueprint. The blueprint is written in pen, but our lifestyle goes over top of that blueprint and can write in chalk, something that's really easy to erase. But if you write in chalk over top of a blueprint, you can now only read the chalk, right? So epigenetics is your cells reading the chalk. At a baseline, the pen is what's actually there. So it's about what's being expressed and what's not being expressed because your cells are going to do what they're told by this methylation profile. So the de-aging is really interesting because they're actually measuring what genes are regularly being turned on and expressed, because when it's methylated, it actually gets turned off. When it's unmethylated, it remains on, right? So that's what that report, it's called a Dunedin pace. It's actually measuring in your blood what genes are on average being turned on and which ones are on average remaining dormant. Then they extrapolate it with this algorithm to show you your rate of aging, right? Telomere length, et cetera, can actually be determined via epigenetic methylation diagnostics. So it's a pretty cool thing to add on. We know your blueprint, but then we know what's being written on top of the blueprint to be read. So that's a good way to quantify it. On top of COMT and all these things, we definitely look at the SOD2 pathway. And remember, your brain has such a density of mitochondria within it that if you're creating excess free radicals, oxidative stress, it's going to have an impact on your cognitive abilities, right? So we look at SOD2. It's like a HEPA filter that clears free radicals. We look at GPX, glutathione peroxidase. Those two genes work in tandem to help clear away reactive oxygen species in the body. And if you're suboptimal there, then we're going to want to add some substrates and some things that help accelerate that process as well.
That's awesome. I'm so glad that you brought that up because epigenetics is like such an important topic. We were saying earlier how there's Dr. Varden is really great with all the details and studies that she reports and everything and just keeping us all up to date. But one of them was talking about mouse studies, which can in some ways be extrapolated to humans, but there's a lot of epigenetic changes that are occurring. And that's why looking at things like cellular age and oxidative stress and some of the epigenetic markers, which change faster than evolution and sometimes faster than even generational, are super important as well. And mitochondria, those genes are super important, right, for energy and cognitive energy. I don't know about you guys, but there's some great formulas on the market, like mitochondrial optimizer from the DNA Co. Is that we still have that one available, right?
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Just double checking because I'm using those ingredients. I'm formulating for people, but that's a really great one. The first time I ever took it, I could notice a difference right away. And clearly I may have had some oxidative stress, so that may have, made the difference there. But I think of oxidation as like the rust on the cells. And that can be a big factor in brain fog. The fact that 60% of you had some degree of brain fog, that one is really one of those almost hallmark symptoms of having a higher toxic burden, I would say. And some things that have really helped me and some of my patients are glutathione, but you do have to be careful with it. And looking at your genes can be really helpful in telling you like whether you'd be better off with injections or supplements, capsules, liquid. So there's some differences there in terms of how people react. And then you can also take glutathione precursors to help you with your oxidation, like N-acetylcysteine is really helpful as a detox supplement. And that one I haven't seen too many negative reactions from. Glutathione does require some experimentation and it helps to see your genes. And then something that most people respond well to, but you have to titrate up, is sauna. So sweating, most people respond well to. If you go all the way and you do like an hour in the sauna, some people will get side effects. So I would caution people against that. You have to slowly go up, just like a workout protocol, right? So some recommendations are more general, others are more based on your genes. So it does help to see your genes.
And I
Those are
love
just
how you mentioned mitochondria and ATP, because I'm going to give a little bit of information about this and maybe blow some people's minds. Because when we talk about the brain, here, this only takes up what, about 2-3% of, your entire body weight. But it will use 20 to 30% of all the ATP energy of the body. Now, taking a look at a neuron, okay, these are the cells that make up the brain. There are 86 billion neurons in the human brain. That's a lot. In each of these neurons, in a single typical neuron, they contain hundreds to thousands of mitochondria, depending on the energy demands of that cell, okay? The energy intensiveness of these cells is absolutely amazing. So your mitochondria has to be pumping out a lot of ATP. They've got to be working well. So if you have oxidative stress, toxins on board, like I mentioned earlier about, mold and mercury and all of these other things that can actually hinder the efficacy, the way that the mitochondria functions, and then throw on top of that that you may happen to have a poor working SOD2, GPX, and other detoxification pathways, and you are not removing these oxidants out and these other toxins, you are putting pressure, you are hindering the mitochondria doing the job to be able to make ATP. I mean, that right there, no wonder people can have brain fog and not be able to concentrate or function properly. It is absolutely amazing, when you think about the massiveness of how our bodies are made. I just get totally fascinated and geek out on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's worth mentioning just in terms of longevity and prevention that like your oxidative stress and the condition of your mitochondria can affect whether or not you end up getting cognitive decline or Alzheimer's. It isn't necessarily the biggest factor, but it is a factor because toxic Alzheimer's is a subtype. The Apollo Institute with Dale Bredesen has studied like all the subtypes, and they're trying to figure out all the main factors in Alzheimer's to work preventively and in treatment, and that is a factor. So there's a lot we can do preventively, and the state of our bodies and our detox does end up affecting our cognitive decline, especially, or our cognitive health, especially if we're thinking long term.
Yeah, especially when we realize that the mitochondria, they don't just make ATP, that energy currency of the cell. They are also environmental sensors. They read what is going on in the cell and the signals that the cell is reading outside of the cell of the extracellular matrix. Okay. And this is in the form of toxins, nutrients that are coming in or not coming in. And this is where, I think, Justin, what we were talking about as chemical imbalance, because I think Faye had mentioned something about that she had heard chemical imbalances, not really the correct terminology or whatever else. Well, it depends on the meaning of what you're talking about. Personally, I think of it as you do not have the molecules, and that includes nutrients, cofactors, atoms, that are necessary for these reactions to happen, for optimization of gene expression to happen. Well, these things are chemicals in a way. It's not just, toxic chemicals or whatever. Yes, it can be, because it can either have a detrimental effect or it can have a beneficial effect. But the fact is, it is in such a fashion that the cell, the mitochondria, are not functioning optimally. And if the mitochondria is reading this dysbiosis, okay, or this dysregulation in the environment, it's going to trigger inflammatory factors, inflammatory cytokines. It's going to maybe, cause it to maybe, oh, we need to double, we need to have mitogenesis and make more of ourselves to create more energy. Or, maybe we need to have mitophagy where it kills itself. Okay. All of these things are triggered. The mitochondria are very active in that surveillance. And, with inflammatory factors going on, that causes neuroinflammation. This has been shown in studies. Neuroinflammation, that is when we start getting the dis-ease that happens in the brain. And however that happens to prevent or present, whether it be Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, other neurodegenerative diseases, and obviously those are further down on the spectrum, of that disease state. But in, earlier symptomology, the headaches, the brain fog, the anxiety, all of the symptoms that, we were listing in our poll, not saying that those will ultimately lead to neurodegeneration or these massive diseases, but it is certainly something that your body is talking to you, saying there is something wrong. Let's figure out what the problem is. Let's find the root cause. Let's fix it. Whether it be giving it nutrients, your B vitamins to help support your methylation pathway, your N-acetylcysteine, your selenium, your, some of these other molecules that we either get by food, by supplementation, things like what Dr. Sapp was talking about. And Justin, I can't wait for you to spout off your wisdom of all the wonderful things to do to help support. But the fact is that your body needs the support. So jumping into that, Justin, when you have someone coming to you, what are some of the overarching things that you would say to have them do?
What's interesting about the human body is that it's A, electrical, B, biochemical, C, bacterial, right? You could argue fungal as well. There's a few moving parts. The mitochondria themselves, they're bacterial, and yet they're producing the electrical, right? And the electrical will influence every cell. Your body can't run without that electricity. So I always start with the basics. We got to make sure that these numerous different microbiomes that the body has are all in balance and you don't have dysbiosis going on there. We need to make sure that your body's electrical capacity is charged. And that means grounding, that means hydrating, that means getting the right minerals in, PEMF and proper photons of light, all these different things to take care of the electrical capacity. Bacterial wise as well, the mouth is a microbiome. There's so many different things that can get dysbiosis. So I try to really put little strategies in place for each of the above. Very simple things, right? Taking care of your oral health. How hard is that? To do a little tongue scrape and a little oil pull and start to get the mouth microbiome okay. Well, how do we take care of electrical? Let's just take your socks and shoes off and let's walk around on the lawn. Justin doesn't shut up about grounding, and I'm not going to, right? Because it's very simple.
Do that in winter? To do that in winter, Justin?
I go for a
In
walk
Canadian winter. You do?
there's other ways
Okay,
to get
just kidding.
negative ions in the winter. You just got to go for a walk in
Totally.
nature and turn your phone on airplane mode. You're still surrounded by negative ions, and all you got to do is walk up and touch a tree, and there you go, you grounded. So it's not necessarily your feet; it's just something on you. um,
Okay. Hugging
yeah,
a tree will work. That's good
hugging
to
a
know.
tree,
That's very
hugging a
good to
tree
know.
will save your life.
Especially in Washington. I don't really want to put my feet on the ground at this time of year, but okay, go
Yeah,
on.
yeah. Hug a tree, go for a swim,
Yeah.
sing Kumbaya. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I beyond that, I look at the genes, right, for those weak points, of course. But we talked a lot tonight about mental illness and is it a chicken or the egg sort of a thing? Are people actually born with a baseline chemical imbalance, or is it because we don't have enough micronutrients, or our gut is compromised, or our circadian rhythm is compromised? I zoom out on all that stuff and I try to get us to do the basics first. There's this concept called moving from general to specific, right? So I start general and then I go to specific, and I use the DNA 360 to get those specificities off. Um, Ladies, do you have anything different that you do? You must start the same way, general, then specific, correct?
Absolutely.
That's actually, yeah, that's a really good concept. I really like that because a lot of clinicians do the opposite, where they start specific and then they get general. Like you're almost trained to work that way. But speaking of the general, I was actually gonna kind of bridge into that. Like for anyone in the audience that doesn't know their detox genes and doesn't have like kind of more specific recommendations, or they haven't done a consult, they haven't tested their toxic burden, I think it's always good to think about what you're taking in and how you're eliminating, right? So, like the basics are clean air, clean water, clean food. So, just basic things like, do you walk outside of the sealed building you work in at lunch? Like, some people don't even consider, oh, maybe I should get some oxygen on my lunch break. And oxygen is super important for detox, especially when you have certain symptom pictures. And then also, you might need an air filter at home, ideally, if you have like allergies and stuff. Clean water. Are you drinking enough water? Are you filtering your water? Things like that. And then clean food. And that, people get a little lost in the weeds, but that's a whole other podcast or webinar, I would say. But one good resource is the Dirty Dozen / Clean 15 from Environmental Working Group. If you're buying produce, you want to get ideally the most pesticided foods like berries and leafy greens, just as two examples. Ideally, you want to get at least those organic. Most people, or a lot of people, can't afford to get everything organic, but that kind of helps you decide that. So clean air, clean water, clean food, and or supplements, because sometimes you need to supplement your diet. And then also opening the pathways of elimination. So before you start with like the fancy detox supplements, are you sweating regularly? You could also do sauna. So you detox through your gut, so making sure you have daily bowel movements, through your urine, making sure you're hydrating enough so you're urinating out metabolites that you might not want, and lungs. So, how's your breathing? Are you supporting breathing? Sometimes NAC, fish oil, things like that can help. Or if you have sleep apnea, getting a CPAP machine. So, yeah, clean air, clean water, clean food. How are you supporting the organs of elimination? That's kind of where I would start.
I want to address a question in the chat, Justin, when you were talking about grounding. David said, what about a grounding mat? Yes, most definitely. If you are unable or can't find, a patch of real, soil that you can put your bare feet on, that is a reality in some cities and some other places. Or you don't want to do the cold exposure, do a Wim Hof and barefoot out in the snow like I do in the winter. Yeah, a grounding mat is wonderful. You really want to even out those ions, those electrons that tend to build up, and really ground yourself, give it back to the earth. It has really shown benefits in blood flow, in blood coagulation, where they can actually stick together and look like a roll of coins. After 15 minutes of grounding, that actually separates and better blood flow movement. I mean, it's just amazing. And I'm right along there with you, Dr. Sapp, when you say about the elimination. One of the main things I always talk to my clients about before I put them on any kind of detox protocol. Number one, are you pooping? you, you've got to be eliminating,
Absolutely.
otherwise you're just going to be reabsorbing those toxins, and we certainly don't want that. But not just that, before you do any detox, the lymphatics. Gotta love the lymphatics. That's got to be flowing and draining. Otherwise, when you're trying to pull the toxins out of the cells, out of the tissues, where are they going to go? If you've got stagnant, thick lymph that's not flowing, getting to the liver to then be processed and then eliminated. So we constantly have to keep going back, going back, going back. To make sure that whole pathway, all of the pathways are being supported. And so you're going like, okay, lymphatics, first of all, what in the world and how the heck do I support that? Lymphatics, it is this clear fluid that basically kind of washes through all around the cells and all of the tissues, and then starts absorbing and going into the bloodstream to the liver to then process out. So as it is collecting these the toxins and waste products, and this is just a natural thing, just natural cellular metabolization, that the waste products that are being created, that's part of it. So how do we support it? Dry brushing. That's wonderful. Light, not hard. It's not massage. Okay. That's deeper. It's right underneath the skin. So just a light brushing or movement. I love Kelly Kennedy. She is fantastic. We call her the lymph queen. She's got some wonderful videos on the correct way to dry brush, but also movement, rebounding, those little mini trampolines, light movement. You don't have to catch air. I have some older women who have osteopenia, osteoporosis, or have some issues with their joints. They can't do a heavy bouncing, but you don't have to. Nice and easy, just light movement, because it's our muscles that actually move the lymph. We don't have active pump moving it like our blood does by the heart. So exercise, again, movement helps to move the lymph. And then, of course, obviously, like I had said about the defecation and all the other Asian nation, I loved how Dr. Stephanie talks about that: urination, defecation, respiration, urinate. I already said urination. Anyway, that all of those being included, that those are all working. So yeah, that's where I start, is looking at the general foundation, doing that general, how can we support that, then start working into more specifics based on tests that they have, looking at their DNA, start putting all these puzzle pieces together to see that more beautiful picture of, the person sitting in front of us. So the other thing, I lost it. There was something else I was going to mention, but I want to start jumping into questions, because we have some beautiful, wonderful questions and several of them. So I would love to start getting into this. And if I remember the other thing I was thinking of, I'll pop that in. So our first question is from Sue. Hi, Susan. Good to see you.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Susan.
She is a brilliant nurse, hypnotherapist, a major friend of the DNA company, and we just love having her be here and being a part of, of our larger extended family. And she's asking, what have you experienced from people who have had chemotherapy and radiation? These are huge amounts that can affect the brain. What have you seen in your research? So I'm going to kind of toss this out to either of you if you have noticed anything, and, then I can, chime in on, things that I have come across.
Mhm.
Have any
I
ex
mean, I have some experience with people post chemo. And one thing I would say is just being like very cautious with your detox protocol. It would be great if you could find a practitioner that was like complimentary, who also knows about all of the conventional treatments. I actually have a good friend who's working with a practitioner like that, who's guiding them and basically titrating their detox protocol. Because one of the worst things you can do with detox is going too aggressive at first. So an example of that would be taking a bunch of glutathione and a bunch of liver herbs and getting in the sauna for an hour every day. That's a quick way to make yourself sick again. So, I mean, fatigue and brain fog would be like two of the common symptoms I've seen. And some of the recommendations we talk about where we just talked about might be applicable, supporting gut, um, urine, sweat, but titrating up and just being cautious in your protocol, and ideally finding a practitioner who works in that realm to guide you in the detox process.
Justin, have you worked with anyone who had gone through chemo or is going through chemo?
I have, yeah, and so exactly what Dr. Sapp just said is has been my approach as far as the general to specific recommendation I made before. That's where I start with someone who just went through something like that. I mean, that's a tough thing on the body. There's no doubt about it. And you've got to start where it starts with normal hydration, shoring up micronutrient deficiencies. We want to be careful about adding in too many hormetic stressors at once as well. Hormetic stressors are a beautiful thing and a mandatory thing, but we want to be careful, to Dr. Sapp's point. Too much of it in the beginning is going to be really rough on the body. Too much sauna, too much cold, too much exercise, too much fasting. And a lot of people get put on fasting protocols for things like cancer, but it's like you're also underweight in the first place, usually, right? So we really want to be specific. Um, yeah, I would start there, but I think anything more specific than that, you would want to work with a practitioner who really specializes in such a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, just as another example would be something like lymphatic massage, which can be super beneficial. But if it's post chemo, you want the timing to be right. You might have to wait at least a couple months and start with shorter appointments and really space them out. So,
Yeah, I've had several family members, my father, my daughter-in-law, that close, going through chemo, having, cancer, and getting that chemo brain, that is often termed. Um, and really for me, the way that I approach it is almost seemingly in a peripheral sort of way, a supportive way with their team of doctors, working and focusing on the cancer, where I generally will focus on making sure that their diet is clean, organic, whole foods, things that will support, what they can handle, because oftentimes your taste buds can change and food just doesn't taste right. And you lose appetite, or, it just, it can be a little difficult when it comes to the food realm. So really making sure that they have the nutrients that are necessary, but also looking at sleep, you know setting up good sleep hygiene, getting some of these low-hanging fruit that can be supportive, that actually, we do, I'm sure both of you as well do with all of your clients in some fashion, the specificity of which obviously works towards that person's DNA, their circumstances, and everything else, but really supporting ways for them to heal. And good sleep, absolutely foundational for that. So, Anyway, let's jump into some of these other questions. So Mary, hi Mary, nice to see you. She's asking, is the mitochondrial support Justin mentioned MitoPure? You want to answer that?
Well, first of all, I'm a big fan of MitoPure. I was recently reading about the relationship between urolithin A, which that's what's in MitoPure, and Akkermansia, which is a probiotic strain, and how Akkermansia actually improves the terrain to help you, build more urolithin A. That wasn't what I was referencing specifically, but that is a great product, great ingredient that directly causes mitophagy in the body as well. So it's urolithin A, and urolithin A, if you combine it with Akkermansia, you'll actually get a better result out of it as well. Interestingly, big fan, but I was talking a little bit more in generalities when I brought it up.
Yeah,
So
there's a lot of good products on the market, including the DNA company's mitochondrial optimizer being my first true love in mitochondrial products. But there are a number of other really good ones on the market. So yeah, that usually start with the word mito. So that's a hint. Yeah.
and please remember, for our audience, that there are lots of ways that you can support your mitochondria. And actually, I remembered what I was going to say from before, that how you were so beautifully explaining, Dr. Sapp, about the different ways, about having clean air, clean water, clean food, and, different supports, that really when it comes to toxins, your toxic load, the toxic burden that can lead to all of these, mental health issues, physiological issues, all of the things. One of the first things that you should do is lower that toxic burden, mitigate your exposure, stop filling your toxic bucket so darn fast. Allow your body to be able to empty that toxic bucket faster than it's being filled. So slowing down, filling your toxic bucket, that is the mitigation. Find out where your exposures are. And there are so many. I know it can be very overwhelming, but this is where visiting environmental working groups site, I put the link at their site URL in the chat. So it's ewg.org. They have a plethora of beautiful information of all the different places that you can find toxins, even typing in a products that you have, and it will tell you the toxins that are in there. Not only that, it will offer you good substitutes that are toxin free, that they have verified. So they're not just leaving you out in the cold going, sorry, no, there are actually companies out there that are very thoughtful and are toxin free. And actually, one of our affiliate partners, Third Rock Essentials, has wonderful products that are all non-toxic, food grade alternatives to the other stuff out on the shelves that are toxic. So, that's just a shout out, to those companies that, want to protect us as well.
And on that note, I want to answer one of Janet's questions about the supplements for detox. But before I get to that, I know a lot of people, when it comes to detox, get so overwhelmed and they say like, oh, well, we're surrounded by chemicals. So what's the point? Everything causes cancer. That's what people used to say, or I used to hear that a lot. So I just kind of want to give you an example of like where to start. So an example of increasing your toxic burden would be, let's say you wake up first thing in the morning and you're not drinking water. You're drinking a ton of coffee. You're taking multiple medications. Then you go to the bathroom and then you start cleaning the bathroom with toxic products. And then you use a bunch of body care products that aren't clean. Then you put on several makeup products. And there's crazy statistics that like the average American will put on like 50 different carcinogenic products before they leave the house. So those are kind of just examples of where you start your day. and how you can lower your toxic burden. So that would be kind of doing the opposite. Hydrating, making sure you're supporting your bowel movements, supporting your detox, checking some of those products slowly over time, um, checking the most highly pesticided foods, sweating every day. Those are places to start. Just because a lot of people, right? Do you find that they're just so overwhelmed by the concept?
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely. But
yeah,
really, it's just taking one step. Just change
absolutely.
one thing.
Hmm.
If you are, um, if you have plastic utensils, okay, start changing them over to something that is a metal, wood, you know, uh, what's another? Oh, good heavens.
Glass. I
Thank you.
love glass.
Glass, okay,
Yeah, big fan.
type
Yeah.
products that you are not introducing more toxins directly into your body, like your cookware, the non-stick, of course, now thankfully there are companies that are making non-toxic non-stick products, but a lot of them have PFAS. These are polyfluoral alkyl substances, forever chemicals. Good luck trying to find a person on this planet who doesn't have that in their bodies and their blood now. So changing over your cookware, get a plant that can help clear your air, that can help, provide more oxygen to you. There are so many things that can be done. Just start with one. And
Hmm.
then the next week or the next month, do something else. And then all of a sudden you have made more changes, and then you will start, hopefully, to start feeling better.
Hmm.
Um, so
Yeah.
I do want to address very quickly, because Faye had put in the question. I can't remember if I had commented before she put this in the Q&A or after, but she had asked to please expand on the chemical imbalance diagnoses. Well, first of all, we're not talking about a diagnosis. We were just talking about a general term, because she'd said that her understanding is that it was debunked. And this is an area that you've got to be careful about taking these large claims, oh, chemical imbalance was debunked. Well, wait, let's dig in a little bit more. First of all, the meaning, what are you talking about? What is it in reference to? How is it the term being used in reference to what, and so on and so forth. So granted, the chemical imbalance theory, okay, because there is no definitive way to measure neurotransmitter levels in the human brain, with them still being alive, to set up any particular direct causal link to mental health, or, showing depression. And a lot of this, is looking at, thinking about neurotransmitters and the imbalance of that. Yes, in that realm, there's that whole discussion about chemical imbalance not being quite right, but that's not how we were exactly meaning it. So it really gets to the biological factors, because mental health, as I'm sure all of you really have started to understand, it is quite complex. There are so many factors involved, biological factors, not only in dysregulation in the neurotransmitter systems, but inflammation, immune system activation, hormonal imbalances, genetic predispositions, all of these things can cause a chemical imbalance. So I hope that clarifies, and I hope that offers more insight to the rest of you, that there's more to it than that. So,
Yeah.
Can I add to that quickly, Dr. Laura?
oh, please.
Um,
Yeah.
just because I mentioned earlier in the call that the body, like the human body, is biochemical, right? So chemical imbalance. It's also electrical. So electrical imbalance, and it's also bacterial, dysbiosis, bacterial imbalance. right? So it's not about debunking and this is now wrong and something else must be right. It's more of a bigger puzzle than that, for which chemistry plays a role, bacterium plays a role, fungus plays a role, electricity plays a
Yeah.
role, right? It's the human body is so complicated. It blows my mind still. Like I'll look at something and just be like, ah, like how is it possible that there's so many moving parts in the cell all at once? It's unbelievable, but it's like there's interplay between all these different systems. So it's not strictly a biochemical problem, but the electricity leads to the chemistry, and that all plays off the bacteria as well. And there's so many things about the body. We're a host and we're also living through it. So just wanted to add that in there.
Yeah, if I could add something too, Justin, that's an excellent point. And then because the human body is so complex, and we're just working to identify all the factors, with chemical imbalances being part of the picture potentially, and it depends on the individual, I often break it down to biopsychosocial. Somebody mentioned spiritual. We could lump that in with maybe psychological or social, or it could be a separate category. But there's biological factors that affect our mental health, like what we're talking about today. There's psychological factors. Maybe you have a history of trauma. Somebody brought that up. And then there's social factors. So, maybe you're working in a stressful job and your home life is also very demanding. So biopsychosocial, those three kind of categories all really affect our mental health. Um, and I feel bad because I haven't answered Janet's question yet. Um, so I don't love starting with the supplements recommendations because we talked about the foundations, and I have seen detox reactions a lot. So to be honest, I used to avoid detox. I don't anymore because it's so important, but it's a very delicate art. I don't know if you guys have found this also, where people just so easily tip into the recirculating toxins and then temporarily making things worse realm. But things like milk thistle at like a reasonable dose, I have not, as long as you take it like at least an hour away from medication, like I have not seen many negative reactions to that, and that supports the liver. Glutathione, but again, you have to be careful with that one. Some people respond really well, others don't respond as well. You can look at your genes for some clues there. Sometimes injections of glutathione, if you work with a functional doctor, are really great for some people. And then there's NAC. Again, in lower doses, I haven't seen too many negative reactions there. It's a pretty great detox supplement that helps antioxidation. For some people, when their toxic burden gets up, they lose their appetite or they're not salivating as much. So sometimes digestive bitters, things like dandelion and gentian, and then you can add in like milk thistle too. There's a lot of formulas that can help with detox. So those are just a few of the examples. Mitochondrial formulas that help support ATP and SAW2. I don't know if you guys have any other kind of go-to favorites.
I have something to add. Yeah, just because the question would be, what are you trying to detox?
Mhm.
Like, what area of the body are you trying to detox? Because Janet mentioned chlorella, which I think has some
Mhm.
pretty good usage for gut detox, maybe for red blood cell detox. There's some uses there. It actually helps to soak up seed oils and things too. So if you have a cheat meal or something, some spirulina and chlorella can certainly be useful there. But that's, again,
And
we use the
mercury,
genes.
right?
Yeah,
Things
yeah, and we need to know,
like
because if it's like liver, I think ingredients like TUDCA are really good for the liver. Is it the gut you're trying to detox? Maybe then it's using silver or using activated charcoal or fulvic acid. Is it the mitochondria? Then maybe it's carbon 60, hydrogen, water. So what are we trying to detox would be the question. I think a
Mhm.
coaching program may be called for if you have a really specific thing that you need to detox, though.
Yeah, and I really do want to add that, the information and the recommendations are, what we're mentioning here obviously is for educational purposes because, we are not working with you. We don't know your history background. I mean, there are some of you who are clients and we do know. And so we can be more specific and we do know what your goals are and we do have this information. But if we don't, it's very hard to say, oh, you should do this, not to mention that's really not, you know, not sanctioned as such as something that should be done anyway. But these are avenues of education, information that you can do some research on and look into working with someone who is qualified to help you tease out all of this information to figure out what is the best route for you. Because absolutely, I'm on board that it is very specific, that you don't want to just throw the kitchen sink at them. You don't just jump into all of these detoxification noted things on the internet saying, oh, this is good. And you could be doing yourself more harm than good. So I always work from the bottom up. Like I had mentioned, you're making sure you're pooping, making sure that, you are sweating, or actually I do know for mold detoxification, people tend not to sweat. So we kind of have to work with some detoxification to get that process, that particular detoxification mode working. But, giving that person the energy in order to do a detox, that's very energy intensive. It is stressful on the body. And this is where, some people, you start jumping into a detoxification program or protocol too fast, your body's not ready, you're going to crash. You are going to have Herxheimer reactions, and you don't need to go there. And that's why working with someone to help you avoid that kind of crash and burn, is really most important. So we have a lot of other questions. Actually, there's a very interesting one, which is one of the reasons why I had mentioned mold, and that Shelley, I'm not going to read through all of it, but basically she was saying that they had moved into a home that had black mold. And previously they were healthy, not a problem, like even her son, 8 years old at the time, had a great checkup. After moving into this moldy home, it's like the whole family started having problems, started having symptoms, a lot of the things that we had been mentioning, every one of them, her daughter, her son, her husband, herself, and pretty severe. And she was asking, do you think the mold could have caused their health conditions that she described, in her question? And I will take this and say, yes, absolutely. I actually did a podcast with Jason Earl from Got Mold. And we talk about mold. We talk about, the things that can happen. Actually, we've had Jason Earl on a couple of times. Wonderful information. So there are things to be aware of, but I'm going to pass the baton over to Dr. Sapp because she has some wonderful information about this. And I do want to also say, because Shelley had also mentioned, what do you think about Relax Sauna's portable infrared sauna? Because you had mentioned about sauna use. So if you'd like to take that.
Yeah, so first off, I'm not familiar with that exact brand. So infrared dry sauna, generally speaking, huge fan, as long as it doesn't have mold in it, as long as it's a clean sauna. I'm kind of deep in the weeds of mold research. And like I said, I used to generally avoid environmental medicine because I thought of it as such a rabbit hole. But given that it has such an impact on mental and cognitive health specifically, I just kept seeing things like mold in practice. And it absolutely can cause a wide variety of symptoms in different people. Some of the most common are brain fog, fatigue, frequent urination, nasal congestion, sinusitis. Those are some of the most common symptoms, but it affects everyone differently. And there's a certain percentage of people, it's about 24%, that have genes where they don't create the antibodies to clear it effectively. If you are currently in that house, I would encourage you to work with a mold practitioner. There is a Facebook group called Toxic Mold Answers. I can put at least the name of the Facebook group on here, and it's with this guy, Matt Kelly, who's a mold specialist. Um, and you want to get your house tested, and you can also test your body. So there's a couple different ways. Urinary mycotoxins is one of the most common ones. So there's companies like Mosaic. That's one of the best ones. And you basically want to be able to test your house and your body. And unfortunately, avoidance is the number one thing. So often people find that once they get out of the environment, and you can test this out, some people test it by doing the Airbnb test. This is a preliminary test. You just rent a space or go somewhere where you're fairly certain it's mold free. Do you feel better within a week? So sometimes that's a preliminary test. And then you have to work on detoxing your house and then your body. So it's a process, but yeah, it has like pretty widespread effects on people. And again, I used to ignore it, but if you can address it, as much as the process is challenging, it's worth it. So
Well, she
yeah,
did mention that they went through a detox and, they're doing much better now, which is
that's
fantastic.
good. I'm
But
so happy to
yeah,
hear.
I do want to mention because I did some research in grad school about this, about black mold. So, this is generally from like Stachybotrys atria or Stachybotrys chartarum. They produce very potent mycotoxins like trichothecenes, gliotoxins. These are known to cause systemic inflammation, oxidative stress, immune dysregulation, things that we've been talking about. Not to mention that mycotoxins are neurotoxic. They are toxic
Absolutely.
to the neurons. They are cytotoxic, toxic to the cells, and they are immunosuppressive. So you tend to be more prone to get sick from other things that are coming at you that you are exposed to out in the environment or to other people. And this can contribute to long-term health complications, especially if you do not recognize it, do not take care of it. I lived in a moldy house for 7 years. Um, and, sometimes it's difficult to be able to move out. But working with someone and doing the best you can, to remove yourself from that, because the cost of remediation can be just astronomic. Sometimes it's best to just leave. And if you are renting, again, Jason Earl has all the information on this. You can actually legally break the lease because of it. And if our angels can get that link to the podcast, he gives the information on how you would go about doing that. But seriously, mold is not anything to ignore. So all right. I know we've got more questions that we want to get to. Let's get to Mina's. And they're asking, I did the DNA test, but where does it say if oral or injections are better for you?
Mm. Justin, is there a section in antioxidation that at one point we had that in one of our reports that's more suggestive of a positive response to IV glutathione?
The only thing I can think of would be within. There's a couple of things that come to mind because in the reports it also talks about a gene called FUT2, and it'll talk about various intake methods of things like B12, sublingual or injection or just a normal oral tablet. With regard to glutathione, the only gene that comes to mind would be that GSTT1, because that's the one that's really going to give you the instruction manual for what your body does with the glutathione when you get it. So it's like some people have suboptimal because they've only got 0 or 1 copies of GSTT1, to where you don't want to be taking large doses of glutathione. And some people speculate that different pathways are better than oral for that particular thing. because if you can't process the glutathione, then it can bind to minerals and you can end up robbing your body of a lot of these types of substrates. Those are the only ones that come to mind. Dr. Laura, can you think of another one or?
I just remembered that GPX was one of the genes that was referenced in a prior report as indicating a more positive response to glutathione injections. But I can get that information to you guys, or we can follow up with that afterwards if we're not sure of the specifics.
Well,
if there's anything there.
Yeah, I also think that the state of someone's gut can really make a difference, but that wouldn't be in our DNA 360 report. That would be in our gut 360 report. For example, if you have, say, IBS or severe gut dysbiosis, and you are not able to metabolize, break down, and absorb the nutrients of your food or of the supplements, well, then, where when you were in a healthier gut state, you would have, that's not about your genes. That is about that, thankfully, changeable state of the gut. Yes, it can be affected by genes. Of course, we're not going to forget about that. But if we can rehab the gut, then, possibly pill form can then work better for you. But in the interim, doing things, getting nutrients or, supplementation through like transdermal patches or something like that can actually be beneficial while the gut is being rehabbed. So we have to keep that in mind as well.
I have also found there's an element of trial and error to gauging the response with glutathione. So that would be another factor. Your overall toxic burden can affect it as well. So if you're in a less toxic state, you may be more responsive. Whereas if you're in a more toxic state, you're more likely to overload the system. So I think that's another factor.
All right. So I want to go through some of these others a little quickly here. We've got a question from Nicole. She says, I have an intermediate COMT. Does that mean it can teeter-totter back and forth between slow and fast, or does it hold at a balanced rate? Should I view it as a good thing, or is it problematic to be intermediate? Who wants to take that?
That's a good thing. I mean, Dr. Mansour used to consider that one the optimal. When you really look at it, there's pros and cons to each of the main three COMT variations: slow, fast, medium. But medium is kind of like best of both worlds in some ways. So I don't know if you guys would agree.
I would, yeah. I mean, and it's really, there's not a teeter-tottering effect so much as the genotype on this one just represents the speed of the enzyme, right? So it's going to be fast, it's going to be slower, it's going to be medium. This is also a gene that clears things like 4-hydroxyestrogens, right? So it even has hormonal implications and things there as well. I do tend to agree that the medium genotype is probably a blessed circumstance because it's not too fast or too slow, and it's not going to teeter-totter. It's going to remain the medium speed unless you do something on purpose to speed it up or slow it down, like Dr. Sapp mentioned earlier in the call.
So yeah, and again, there's that's one gene. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. There are many functions that it has, and how is it playing, in the overall team. So there's definitely other things to be looking at. But yeah, it's a matter of the upregulating, downregulating within the gene space that you have to work with. So all right, next question. Dirk, he's asking, do brain cells have some type of special physiology or mechanism to preemptively extract larger amounts of glucose or ketones from the blood to get the 20 to 30% their mitochondria need to produce the larger supply of ATP? And he's talking about like at the expense of other cells like muscle cells. Well, first of all, they are separated in that, but yes, and without diving into a whole thing, which I could because I love the brain and that's my neuroscience background, that things like the fact that the brain primarily uses and relies on glucose as its main energy source. It is preferential, and there are high affinity glucose transporters called GLUT, G-L-U-T transporters. And these are highly expressed in the blood-brain barrier and glial cells that helps with that glucose transport. There are the metabolic priority that neurons are given over other tissues because they can't store energy as glycogen. So, obviously they are going to be taking that. Our bodies are absolutely brilliant in the way that they do that. Now, they also brain uses ketones, and this is where metabolic flexibility comes in. You want to have the cells in your body be able to use ketones, fat, as fuel as readily as glucose. So when glucose availability is reduced, like say someone is fasting, having ketogenic diets, prolonged exercise, things like that, the brain will shift into using ketones as the alternative fuel source. And there are special ketone transporters. These are what they call monocarboxylate transporters, MCT, and then there's numbers behind them that are more prevalent in neurons. So again, these are usually upregulated when glucose is lower. And yeah, so those are just some of the things. There are others, but definitely love the nerdiness of the question. Thank you for letting me dive into that a little bit. So Janet, we did answer a couple of the questions, but there was one she was asking about PQQ or supplements for detox besides chloroplast and PQQ. I think we pretty much covered these. Was there anything else that you wanted to add before we dive into the other questions?
No, I think we nailed that one pretty good.
Beautiful. Okay, Dirk, I love this. You've got so many great questions. Okay, so he's asking again, what genes make some people more sensitive to EMF? And does EMF have more impactful effect on brain cells than other parts of the body? What a fantastic question. Let me toss this out to either one of you. Have you come across anything in that realm specific to EMFs?
I've only come across mold toxicity affecting responsiveness to EMFs. And then also, if you have overall poor detox, that would make you more likely to be sensitive. But I haven't identified any of the specific genes. I don't know about you, Justin, or if the report goes over any of them.
So currently the report doesn't really go over that. We can extrapolate a little bit about things like inflammation. I don't think that there's enough research on Wi-Fi in correlation to genes yet, just because Wi-Fi is so new. And even genetic research, really the last 70 years has been when the most leaps and bounds have taken place. I think it does make a little bit of sense that the brain would be among the main things that's impacted there, because we're holding our cell phones right up to the thing. Right? Like that's where a lot of the actual location is with that. I think genetically speaking, it's possible that your methylation cycle could be impacted. I have no data whatsoever, so don't take that too seriously. Anything to do with inflammation, if you're really poor at dealing with inflammation, I would say that there's a likelihood that you're more sensitive to EMFs, but keyword being likelihood. I have no diagnostic data to back any of that up.
Yeah, really, it's a matter of the frequencies, the pulsation of that of the EMFs. Actually, I did my very first podcast host with the EMF guy, Nick Pinot, and he actually just had a summit where he interviewed some incredibly brilliant doctors, scientists, and other people that specifically focused on EMFs, how that affects the body, the cells, the brain, all of these different things. So I would actually recommend, taking a look at his site. He's got some free information, just fantastic. But again, this is something that we could go down, an entire rabbit hole for, and even its connection with mold. and the incitation, for people who have parasites and mold, and how it exacerbates symptoms and all of that. So, and I want to get to the rest of these questions. So thank you so much. Another question that he has: do you need to get your health into some better state before undertaking detox, especially heavy metals? For example, should you first heal the leaky gut? I'm going to say that we actually have someone on staff, Lynn Angel, who specializes in mercury detox, heavy metals. I also do detoxification. And, it's like the chicken or the egg type of thing. There's more information needed. Yes, you want to start getting your health, your body prepared, like I had mentioned earlier, preparing the body for that energy intensiveness that a detoxification protocol takes. But the leaky gut could be because of the toxins on board. So you kind of have to come at it from a multimodal aspect, supporting different ways while, focusing maybe on one or two of those ways. But again, it's a little more personalized based on what else is going on. Do either of you have any other comments on how you would go about or answering his question?
I mean, some DMSA protocols where you're getting in the sauna, you take breaks between like pulsing. I think you had mentioned that, Dr. Varden. And you don't necessarily have to be in a state of optimal health because obviously you're doing it to improve your health. But yeah, supporting the organs of elimination beforehand is helpful. And then also scaling back if you are going into, if you have a Herxheimer a detox reaction, then you scale back a bit and then you reintroduce and titrate up the dose again. So, yeah, so it is a delicate art, but if you're supporting the organs of elimination, if you're having bowel movements daily, if you're drinking enough water, eating a clean diet, and just have kind of the basics under control, you can often go through that protocol with a practitioner and be okay. Keeping in mind your symptoms and just paying attention to them on a daily basis so you don't reach that tipping point of a detox reaction.
Thank you. So two more questions. One from Mary. Hi, Mary again. She's asking, is rebounding better for the lymphatics than other types of exercise, such as walking or weight training? And actually, I'll mention this one, seeing that, it's something that I am a major proponent of and mentioned that, yeah, first of all three have benefits for the lymphatic system, but rebounding in particular is often considered particularly effective due to its unique mechanism of stimulating that lymphatic flow. And, really, it is a matter of that gentle bouncing that creates a rhythmic compression and decompression of the tissues, that vertical acceleration, deceleration of the body during the rebounding that actually generates that pumping effect that I was talking about earlier, that promotes that lymphatic flow. So between gravitational forces of that up and down motion, increased pressure changes, that rhythmicity of it, and the fact that it's low impact, it's gentle on the joints. It really makes it accessible for people of all fitness levels, and especially with those with joint concerns. So, honestly, studies have actually suggested that rebounding can increase lymphatic flow up to 15 to 30 times the resting state. Significantly boosting that detoxification immune response. So, yeah, but again, whatever you can do, movement is better than being static or stationary. So, our last question of the night, Nicole, she is asking, how would you help a person that is slow detoxifier to detox their mercury load and also some lead?
You would have to know in what ways are you a slow detoxifier, right? Because we need to know what systems actually require the support. My general recommendation is to talk to Lynn Angel, like Dr. Laura just said, because she's the expert in the space. But uh, moving from general to specific, I do think is a pretty good recommendation here as well. Just not knowing what your genes are. Eat some high ORAC foods, right? Look at the Dirty Dozen, look at the Clean 15, to Dr. Sapp's point earlier. Maybe it's a little bit of fasting. Maybe it's getting in the sauna. There's so many ways to detox, but we just need to know what system is suboptimal in the first place. I even think the lymphatic drainage strategy is probably useful there, right? Like I have this vibration plate thing that I do prior to getting in the sauna to kind of get things flowing first and then get the phase 2 detox via the sweat. So combining a few of these little simple strategies is a pretty good starting point, I would say.
Yeah, and one thing I will say that I have learned from Lynn Angel about mercury detoxification, thiols. You want to remove thiols from your diet, from, the things that you are taking. So, even if you did a thiol-free diet, and see how do you feel, do that, for like a week or so, and then take them again and see. That can give you some insight onto your mercury load. And got to be careful with like alpha lipoic acid. That's not something that you should be taking if you have a high mercury load. And there are all reasons for this, which I'm not going to dive into, but all the more that working with someone who really knows what they're doing, an angel, when it comes to mercury detox and lead, she has proven ways and protocols to work through that. So guys, I'll tell you, I am so thankful for your experience, your brilliance, your information. I thank all of you, our audience, for sticking with us, for being here today. And hopefully you have learned something that you didn't know before that you can take away, start implementing. We're here for you. So, if you have learned at least one new thing tonight that you can walk away saying, yep, that was worth it, give me a yes. Give me, maybe what you learned in the chat. Love to see that. If the chat is still open, I'd like to know, are we doing our jobs? Are we giving you what you are asking for? Have we helped you? So, Justin, Dr. Sapp, gosh, thank you so much. Great, guys. I love to see that. Yes, good. I'm glad we were able to help. Any last words from either of you?
No, I just want to say thank you guys. And we all come from such different backgrounds. And I love the fact that we're able to kind of fill the gaps for each other and have this discussion coming from different angles and speak more generally to the audience in a way that's kind of more applicable. And thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. And it's such a pleasure and love doing these with you guys.
Absolutely. Ditto. Thank you to both of you. I love these things. Like this is one of the more fun parts of my work week. So I enjoy this. And thanks to everybody for showing up. Without you, we'd have no reason to do it. So thank you guys.
Well, to all of you, thank you for joining us. We hope to see you again at our next webinar. Until then, have a beautiful rest of your day. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Take care, guys.